Welcome back to another episode of the Public Lands Podcast. My name is Austin Salargo, and I am excited to bring to you today an episode that dives into the issue of sulfide mining, specifically in northern Minnesota. I had the pleasure of speaking with Paula Maccabee, the Advocacy Director and Counsel for WaterLegacy. WaterLegacy is a non-profit organization that has been working to stop the entry of sulfide mining into Minnesota, its main fear being the polymet mine. We go over the negative effects of sulfide mining, what WaterLegacy has been able to accomplish, as well as the frustrations that have come up. And finally, Paula gives us some excellent information for those people that would like to get involved. Paula truly was a pleasure to talk to. Her knowledge on the subject is vast, as is her reputation and credentials. The issue of sulfide mining is something that is important to all of us, whether nature enthusiast or not. Sadly, many people are unaware of the severity of the risk. I hope that you find this episode informational both on the issue at hand as well as what you can do to help. Hi, everybody. I have Paula Maccabee here. She works for WaterLegacy, an organization that is working to protect the waters of northern Minnesota. And I've got a few questions that I get to ask with her, and I'm really excited to explore that today. So, Paula, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. I definitely appreciate you being willing to talk to us.
Thank you, Austin. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So, I think that kind of first and foremost, it would be pretty helpful to the listeners if we could start by just kind of having you introduce yourself and give a brief overview of WaterLegacy as an organization, as well as the role that you hold there.
Excellent. My name is Paula Maccabee, and I am the Advocacy Director and Legal Counsel for WaterLegacy. And I graduated from Yale Law School in 1981 and have spent about 40 years now doing public interest law. And I began working with WaterLegacy right when it was founded, which was in 2009. And at that time, it was not a popular thing to oppose copper-nickel sulfide mining.
Sure.
And there were some citizens who were very active in northern Minnesota who felt it was important to have a new organization with technical and scientific and legal capacity, specifically trying to protect Minnesota clean waters and habitats from copper-nickel sulfide mining. And WaterLegacy's mission coming out of this grassroots work is to protect Minnesota's fresh waters and the communities, plant, animal, and human, that rely on clean water for their life and their health.
Sure. I guess kind of the focus that I'd like to take, at least at the beginning here, is really digging into that sulfide mining piece of things.
All right.
So, I know that there are a number of potential consequences that can come from sulfide mining. I'd like to touch on some of those, and if you could provide maybe just some basic background information about each, and then explain how sulfide mining is connected to that. And then maybe finally, the work that WaterLegacy has done in that area. That would be really great. So the first one that I would like to touch on is water quality, which I know that you did mention just a second ago.
Well, that is a really key one to begin with, Austin, because the fact is that whenever copper, nickel, or other hard rock mining has been done in sulfide-bearing ore. They call it hard rock mining at the EPA, and we call it sulfide mining on the advice of our experts.
Sure.
Whenever that sulfide mining has been done in a water-rich environment like that in northern Minnesota, what has resulted is either acid mine drainage, toxic metals pollution, or both, in either surface water like lakes and streams or groundwater or both. In other words, if you look at sulfide mining just in terms of protection of water quality, the track record is a dismal 100% failure rate. Oof. And so the biggest concern about copper nickel mining coming to Minnesota is the effects on water quality.
Okay. Could you go into just a little bit more detail around the Tribal Clean Water Act and how that relates to things?
Well, what's interesting is that the Clean Water Act is a federal law which goes back to 1972 in its current form. And the Clean Water Act was written to delegate much of the federal authority to set water quality standards, limits on the amount of pollution that could come out of any discharger,
Okay.
to states. But there was also a provision in that law that says that tribes, as sovereign nations, can also exercise the power of a state if they go through a process of approval by the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay.
And the polymet sulfide mine, it's the first sulfide mine ever proposed in Minnesota, is upstream of one of the bands of the Lake Superior Chippewa that has gone through all of the hoops to have the right to have their own water quality standards. Okay. So when WaterLegacy has been working in alliance with the tribes, we focused on the effects on tribal water quality as well as effects on pollution of the lakes and streams that are affected by state water quality standards.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. So let's just segue into, I think, kind of a related topic. Another potential concern is that of wild rice and the wild rice sulfite standard. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that?
These are two related issues. One of the issues about sulfide mining, and you can hear this similarity between the words sulfide and sulfate. Sulfate is the form of sulfur when the pollution gets into the water. Sulfide is the basic chemical material when it's in the rock. And there's a chemical interaction with sulfate that causes the decimation of wild rice. And wild rice is an extremely important grain for the Ojibwe people. It's actually part of their culture as well as part of their sustenance. Sure. And sulfide mining, including the polymet mine, if that pollution escapes from waste rock and from mine pits and from processing, that pollution going downstream will affect wild rice and reduce the likelihood of the wild rice surviving. Sure. So WaterLegacy has taken two approaches. One, we've challenged the water pollution permit for the polymet mine. One of the bases is that it does not protect wild rice. And also we've been in a 10-year battle with special interests to prevent them from basically repealing the water quality standard that we've had on the books in Minnesota since 1973 to try and protect wild rice.
Sure. Okay. Very cool. I guess the last environmental consequence that I wanted to touch on is just the habitat and climate change and what we're seeing happen in that regard.
Well, I think you got some really important things there, Austin, because sulfide mining and the polymet mine would be in the Lake Superior watershed. Future sulfide mines are also proposed in the Boundary Waters watershed and even in the Mississippi River watershed. So one of our goals in focusing on the polymet mine is to stop sulfide mining from affecting Minnesota. You're right that there are so many important impacts. First, the polymet mine would directly destroy approximately 1,000 acres of wetlands. And that is the largest destruction of wetlands that would ever have been approved in Minnesota since the Clean Water Act rules were adopted. Okay. And the destruction of wetlands means destruction of habitats. It also means destruction of places where carbon is sequestered, which has huge climate crisis impacts. Okay. Polymet would be a climate crisis catastrophe, both because of destruction of wetlands and because it takes so much fossil fuel combustion to blast the copper and ore out of the ground and pulverize it and process it. As a matter of fact, most of the research suggests that if you compare the amount of fossil fuel consequence of mining new copper ore to recycling scrap copper, that recycling the scrap copper instead in order to get our needs of copper met would take would save 90% of the fossil
Okay.
fuel energy.
Okay.
So what we have with you mentioned the water quality, and acid mine drainage is important because it kills fish. Sulfate is dangerous not only because it kills wild rice, but because the interaction on a chemical way between sulfate and mercury increases mercury contamination of fish.
Sure.
And that methyl mercury that accumulates in fish is the kind that's toxic to the developing brains of fetuses, infants, and children. So you have a climate issue, you have a water quality issue, a habitat threat, and a really important health threat to the people, and particularly the most vulnerable people, the infants and children in Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for all that information. That's definitely a worthy fight. So definitely appreciate your work there. Let's move on now. Polymet has been coming up repeatedly here, and my understanding is that it is one of a few mines that you guys are currently working against. Let's just zoom in on Polymet a little bit more and just go over kind of specifically its location, size, the organization, that sort of stuff. Anything that you find pertinent.
Well, what's really important about Polymet is Polymet would be located in the headwaters of the St. Louis River. And the St. Louis River is the largest tributary to Lake Superior. And what the research has shown is one of the most dangerous things about the Polymet mine is it's using out-of-date technology to put its tailing waste behind dams. As a matter of fact, the kind of out-of-date technology that Polymet is proposing and that the state of Minnesota has permitted has been banned in countries throughout the South America. I mean, Brazil has banned it, Chile has banned it because it's too dangerous. Sure. And if that dam broke, the pollution could go not only in the area right around Polymet, but down the St. Louis River all the way to Lake Superior. And that would affect many homes, many residences, the Fond du Lac Band, and the estuary that's right near Duluth.
Sure. So
that's the location. Now, a couple other things about Polymet. Polymet is kind of a shell corporation. Polymet sounds like it's a nice little U.S. company, but actually it's a shell corporation. And a multinational called Glencore now owns 72% of the stock, and they're basically in control of Polymet.
Okay.
The reason this matters is Glencore is notorious across the world for labor abuses, human rights abuses, bribery, and corruption.
Sure.
And as a matter of fact, the steelworkers ranked Glencore as the second worst corporation in the world in terms of labor relations. So that's Minnesota has a lot of wonderful homegrown businesses. That's not what's happening in this industry.
Sure.
So and the reason why so much focus from WaterLegacy's perspective has been placed on Polymet is because it's the first sulfide mine. And they were telling their investors even 8-10 years ago that Polymet would be the snowplow after which all the other mines would follow. It would be breaking the ground.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's been so important for WaterLegacy and the Fond du Lac Band and other environmental groups to file legal challenges at very weak Polymet permits that allow out-of-date and unprotected technology that would really put Minnesota at risk, not just our water and our habitats, but also our taxpayers.
Sure. Yeah, it's scary to think about that door being opened for sure and allowing, what could potentially follow. All right, well, let's move kind of into WaterLegacy's specific work that has been done surrounding Polymet, the environmental impact and the environmental review, both of those things.
Well, let's put it this way. When we started this work and we began talking to experts and citizen experts, we thought this project was so unacceptable legally and scientifically that if we just provided really robust comments and lots of citizen input, this project would go away. And so we spent years putting in expert reports and comments on the draft and the supplemental draft, the final draft environmental review. And actually there were approximately 90,000 comments that
Wow.
we and our allies um, helped educate citizens to send in. And those comments were vast majority very much opposed to the project.
Sure.
And what we learned in this process is that our state agencies were so committed to moving forward that they would look at those comments and they would just use them to make better rationalizations, not really to improve the project, and certainly not to change the scale or think of another proposal.
Sure.
And so even though we went through this robust environmental review process, the project was basically the deal that Parliament had cut, a decade ago.
Sure.
And so as a result, WaterLegacy and our allies have had to move from communicating with the agencies to suing the agencies.
Okay.
And WaterLegacy has participated in several litigation involving the Parliament project, but the two big ones are the water pollution permit. We appealed that to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, and the permit to mine, which is issued by a different state agency. We also appealed that to the Minnesota Court of Appeals.
Okay.
And what's very unusual is that looking at the water pollution permit relatively early on, WaterLegacy and some of the whistleblowers identified some real irregularities in the permit. And the Pollution Control Agency was in cahoots with the political appointees at the United States EPA to suppress the comments of scientists and attorneys who worked on sort of like the staff level at the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level, so that those were hidden from the record, they're hidden from the public. And we found out from a whistleblower and a bunch of litigation, got that document released and found out that our suspicions that the permit was not any good were actually also the same views held by the Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay.
And just about that time, the courts agreed with us to basically suspend the Parliament permits during the litigation. Most of the time, once an environmental group sues, it doesn't really stop anything.
Okay.
The project keeps going on. So even if you win, it's kind of like, what did you really win? But in the Parliament case, as a result of the sort of hanky-panky surrounding the water pollution permit, the Court of Appeals suspended first the water pollution permit and then the permit to mine.
Okay.
So we're not, we don't yet have final outcomes in the courts, but at least while we're doing the litigation and investigation, there's no construction of the mine and there's no destruction of the environment taking place.
Very good. Yeah, that must be very rewarding to have some type of tangible result here where you can really, see that the work is paying off.
Well, we won't know until, for example, we had a great decision last January by the Court of Appeals that basically said, Department of Natural Resources, you have to do the Parliament permit over. It wasn't done right. You have to have a public hearing and there has to be participation by the various citizen groups. And that decision, though, the state and the Parliament appealed it to the Minnesota Supreme Court. So we don't have the final outcome in terms of whether that permit is going to be sustained or overturned.
Okay. Wow. Okay. It's a little bit up in the air still, but very good.
What it is it's very clear that if we, and WaterLegacy and our allies hadn't done this kind of very intensive and difficult work, those wetlands and those waters would be destroyed by now.
Yeah.
Whether we ultimately succeed in protecting them is something that is still up ahead for us to find out. And that's what motivates us to get up every morning and stay at the computers late at night to try and make sure that we can protect the waters of Minnesota and the communities that rely on them.
Yeah. Well, definitely thank you for doing that. I personally appreciate it. I know that a lot of the listeners will as well. So I think that's kind of a good segue into the last two pieces here that I want to touch on. The first is, I know that the reason why we've seen this increase in sulfide mining, this push for sulfide mining, is because easily mined metals are disappearing. We don't have access to them really as much as we used to. So my question for you is there a safe way? Do you feel like there is a safe way to move forward with sulfide mining?
I would have to say that I think there is no safe way to move forward with sulfide mining in an environment like northern Minnesota, where basically it's all wetlands and
Sure.
lakes.
Okay.
It may be possible, though it would be much more expensive, to mine safely in other areas. But what we're seeing, first of all, I would suggest that much of the Minnesota's deposits of copper and nickel are what they call disseminated.
Mm.
And what that really means is that they're really spread out and they're low quality. So polymet would be a very wasteful way of mining. It would be less, quite a bit less than 1% of what would be blasted out of the ground would end up as being processable ore. More than 99% of what comes out of the ground would be left there permanently as waste.
Okay.
Leaching chemicals. So that if we're looking at, well, do we need to have metals? The answer is yes. But the U.S. Geological Survey does a report on this every year. And their estimate is that we're only recycling about 1/3 of the copper type metals that are available in our already out in our commercial stream that could be collected and recycled.
Okay.
So you'd have a hard time persuading me we should take an experiment with sulfide mining in a water-rich environment when all we've seen is failure, when there is a much less environmentally harmful way of getting that metal, and that's by requiring and incentivizing recycling of metals.
Sure. We could do a whole nother podcast episode on that.
I know.
All right, cool. Well, the last thing that I kind of want to get in here is, I want to provide a podcast episode where the issue is both addressed, but there also is maybe some information for the listeners on ways that they can get involved, ways that they could help. And I think it might be helpful to kind of maybe give two separate answers, one for the person who is extremely passionate about it and maybe some really extra go get them opportunities. And then maybe another for just the people that this sounds concerning to them, and maybe like, what's that one thing that could really help WaterLegacy and you with this fight?
Well, first in terms of people who are really gung-ho, WaterLegacy is not doing right now in-person events because of the pandemic. But we are still engaging people in important activities. And one of the things right now the state of Minnesota is planning to really weaken the rules that limit the types of pollution that come from sulfide mining. And those are salts and ionic pollutants. And we will have on our website very soon ways for people to take action and send in comments. And sometime in either February or early spring, there will be a hearing. So people who are really gung-ho, there will be an opportunity not just to send in comments, but an opportunity to actually prepare and testify, whether it's virtually or in person. And that human testimony has made an enormous amount of difference. That's basically one of the main reasons that we didn't lose the sulfate standard. And so if you go to WaterLegacy, it's just waterlegacy.org, and you sign up, we'll give you, notification when this opportunity either to comment or to testify or to show up takes place. And then for sort of the regular person who just wants to make sure they're being informed, just, go to Facebook, look up WaterLegacy, share our stuff, like our stuff, comment, and then you have a chance to sort of just figure out what it is that intrigues you and do you want to get more involved? Because there's so much to learn and things are changing all the time. And this is really a dynamic area where you can learn about sulfide mining, but we are going to have a concert on Facebook December 17th at 7:00. Really great musicians. It's Minnesota musicians who play folk music and alternative music. And they're all donating their time for WaterLegacy. And that might be something that's kind of fun, and there's a little bit of education, but it's more like if you just want to dip your toe in the water and see if this is something that you're interested in.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Paula, thank you very much for coming on and talking. I definitely appreciate the information and the insight, and I think some others will as well.
Well, thank you so much, Austin. I think this is really great. And I think the more people who can learn about sulfide mining and the threats to water and how important community engagement is and people's comments, especially at the administrative level, there's a lot of hope for the future.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I once again definitely appreciate it, and best of luck with the continued fight and the continued efforts that you guys are putting forth.
And thank you for encouraging people to get involved. And please, if you go to waterlegacy.org, there's a ton of information and chances to sign up and get involved.
Excellent. Thanks, Paula. We'll talk to you
Thank
later.
you, Austin. Take care.